My name is Myra Austin and I'm 32 years old. 2 years ago, at my grandmother's funeral reception, I found my little sister locked in a closet under my parents' stairs. Sadie is 22. The latch was on the outside of the door, solid brass, mounted where no hand inside could ever reach it. Somebody had started the dryer in the next room so the guests wouldn't hear her knocking. I'm a paramedic. I've spent 9 years walking into the worst moments of strangers' lives, and nothing on any of those calls prepared me for my own family's hallway. I thought getting her out of that closet was the rescue. It wasn't. What I pulled her into was worse, and what I found buried in my family's past was darker than both. But my parents forgot one thing about me. In my job, we don't get to look away. The last time I opened that door, it cost me everything I had. This time, I decided, the cost was going to land somewhere else. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come into the light one story at a time. If you believe the quietest person in the family deserves to be heard, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because stories like my sister's don't get told nearly enough. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of town where your last name is a storefront. Austin Hardware had been on Main Street for 3 generations. My dad, Gerald, ran the register and passed the collection plate on Sundays. My mom, Patricia, ran everything else, including how we were seen. Sadie was born when I was 10. She lined up spoons by color before she could walk steady. She loved birds, loved them with her whole body, flapping her hands when the finches hit the feeder like she might lift off with them. When she was 4, a specialist in Columbus said the word autism, and my mother's first question was, who else would have access to the file? There was no early intervention after that. No speech therapy, no school. There was a tutor who came through the back door and got paid in cash, and a story for church about a delicate immune system. And there was the closet under the stairs. My mother cleared it out the summer Sadie turned 5. A pillow, a flashlight, a basket of coloring books. She called it the quiet room, and she swore Sadie chose it, and sometimes Sadie did. Loud rooms hurt her. I understood that even then. But you don't put a latch on the outside of a door your child chose. The latch went up right before the church potluck came through our house that fall. I stood in the hallway and watched my father drive the screws. I remember the sound the latch made when my mother tested it. A small brass click. Neat and final, like a period at the end of a sentence nobody would ever be allowed to read. I was 15. I've hated that sound every day since. People ask when I knew it was wrong. I knew at 8, at 11, at 15. Knowing and being able to do something are different animals when you live under your father's roof. The Christmas I was 18, half the congregation came through our front door. Sadie was 8, and she'd had a good morning, and then the house filled with voices and perfume and she started rocking, and my mother walked her down the hall with a plate of cookies and slid the latch. 20 minutes into dinner, I could hear her under the carols, not crying, knocking. A steady, patient knock, like a person being polite about drowning. I got up in the middle of my father's toast, opened that door, and carried her out in front of everyone. You'd have thought I brought a body into the room. My father walked me onto the porch by the arm and told me the quiet room was a family decision. I told him a lock is not a decision. It's a cage. He shoved me. I was 18 and dumb, and I shoved back harder, and he went through the screen door. The neighbors called the police. My father stood in the red and blue lights, bleeding from one eyebrow, and told them his daughter was out of control. I took a misdemeanor plea because a trial would embarrass the family. Those were my mother's words. She swept up the glass that night and said, "Family means nobody has to know." She meant the fight. She meant Sadie. She meant everything, forever. I packed a duffel bag that week. The last thing I did in that house was kneel by the closet door and knock twice. Soft. 2 knocks was our signal. "It's me. You're safe." She knocked back. I told her through the wood that I'd come back for her. It took me 14 years, and that is the part of this story I can't fix. Columbus is 2 hours from Millbrook, and for 14 years it might as well have been another country. I took the EMT course because it was fast and it was work, and it turned out I was built for it. 9 years on a medic truck teaches you a certain arithmetic. Airway before everything. Treat what kills first. I sent Sadie a present every birthday. A bird book. Colored pencils, the good kind. For 3 years the packages disappeared into that house, and I let myself believe she got them. The 4th year, the box came back stamped "Return to sender" in my mother's handwriting. When I called, Mom answered like a woman reading a statement to the press. Sadie is fine. Sadie is thriving. Sadie doesn't need to be confused. My father got on the line exactly once, and he kept it short. I still had a record. He still had a lawyer. If I came around Sadie again, he'd call it stalking and let a judge admire the pattern. I drove down twice, anyway. Both times I sat in my truck across from Austin Hardware, watched my dad flip the sign to closed, and drove back to Columbus with my hands aching on the wheel. Call that weakness. Some nights I do. But a woman with a record who forces her way past a legal warning doesn't rescue anybody. She hands them a villain with her own face on it, and the girl in the closet pays for the sequel. So I stayed away, and I got very good at chest compressions. And then, one gray Tuesday in February, my grandmother's lawyer called the station asking for me by name. Ruth Austin was gone. Heart failure, in her sleep, at 84. Then he said the strange part. She'd left instructions about the funeral, he told me. She wanted to make sure Myra comes. The funeral was beautiful the way a store window is beautiful. White lilies matched to the ribbon, a printed program on heavy paper, my family filling the front pew in coordinated navy. The pastor called us a family that holds together, and my mother tilted her chin like the phrase was a crown being set on her. I sat 3 rows back. Nobody saved me a seat. Afterward, at the reception in my parents' house, a small man in a brown suit found me by the coat rack. Bill Hartman, my grandmother's lawyer for 40 years. He had the handshake of a man who bills honestly and the eyes of a man who doesn't miss much. He told me Grandma Ruth had left a special needs trust for Sadie, just over $200,000, meant to fund care, therapy, a real life. Until the court sorted out the details, the temporary trustee was my Aunt Corinne, my father's older sister. Then Hartman leaned closer and lowered his voice. Ruth had said something when she signed the papers, he told me, something he'd been chewing on for 2 years. She'd tapped the trust documents and said, "So it never happens again." He asked me if I knew what that meant. I didn't. Not then. I was only half listening anyway, because I'd started doing the thing I do at a scene, counting heads without deciding to. Cousins by the coffee, deacons by the ham. My mother refilling cups that were already full. Everybody accounted for except the one person the money was for. My sister wasn't in the living room. She wasn't in the kitchen or the yard. And underneath the murmur of 50 polite voices from the back hallway of my parents' house, I heard a sound that made no sense at a funeral. The dryer was running. Nobody does laundry at a funeral. I followed the sound down the hallway I grew up in. The dryer thumped away behind the laundry room door, tumbling what turned out to be 2 towels. Past it, under the stairs, the closet. The old latch was gone. In its place sat a new one, solid brass, bright against 14 years of paint, and it was slid shut. Under the dryer's rhythm I caught it, faint and steady. A knock. Patient. Polite about drowning. My training says announce yourself, so I did the only version of that I know. I knocked twice, soft. The knocking inside stopped. Then 2 knocks came back. I opened the door and there was my sister, 22 years old, sitting on a beanbag between the winter coats with headphones over her ears and a coloring book on her knees. Thinner than any photo I'd seen. Pale the way people get when their world has a ceiling. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her place me. The changed face, the years, all of it. Then she reached out and knocked her knuckles twice against the floor. "It's me. You're safe." I was still on my knees in front of her when my mother's shadow fell across us both. "She likes it in there," Mom said, keeping her voice down, guests in earshot. "It's her safe space, Myra." She asked to go in. My father appeared behind her, jaw set. "Don't make a scene at your grandmother's funeral," he said. A scene. There it was, the family religion, and I finally had a name for my heresy. I looked at the shining new latch, screwed in at adult height on the outside, and one thought arrived, very calm and very clear, the way things do when the adrenaline is real. Quiet is not the same as peace. I took my phone out and photographed the latch while my parents watched. Then I helped my sister up into the light. I had it all mapped in my head inside a minute. Sadie in my truck, a hotel in Columbus, calls in the morning. My father watched me do the math like he'd been waiting for it, and then he went to the study and came back with a folder. And he laid it on the kitchen counter between us the way you'd lay down a winning hand. Letters of guardianship, county probate court, with a raised seal. Gerald and Patricia Austin, co-guardians of the person of Sadie Ruth Austin, an incapacitated adult. Signed the summer she turned 18. 4 years and I never knew, because the hearing notice went to family, and I'd stopped being family the night I went through a screen door. "You take her out that door," my father said quietly, "and it's abduction of a ward. Your word against ours. A woman with a record." He wasn't wrong, and we both knew it, and I hated him with a completeness I have never felt for another human being before or since. Here's what I want you to understand, because it matters for everything that comes after. Walking out of that house without my sister was the hardest correct decision of my life. You do not beat a locked door by breaking it. You beat it by getting the key, legally, permanently, in a way nobody can ever slide shut again. I knelt by Sadie where she sat with her coloring book, and I knocked twice on the arm of her chair, and she knocked twice back, and I walked out to my truck with keys that felt like they weighed 40 pounds. Aunt Corinne was standing on the porch when I came out. 64 years old, steel gray bun, arms crossed like a woman guarding a gate. "You always did like kicking doors open, Myra," she said. "Some doors are closed for a reason." I'd remember that sentence later, standing in a lawyer's office, holding a photograph of 2 little boys. Monday morning, I called Adult Protective Services from the station parking lot in Columbus and gave them everything. The latch, the photograph, the guardianship, the 4 missing years of medical records I suspected but couldn't prove. The intake worker took it down without any drama, and a caseworker named Ms. Cho got assigned, and I learned my first lesson about the system that week. The system knocks before it comes in. A guardianship welfare check gets scheduled. Scheduled means warned. By the time Ms. Cho stood in my parents' hallway, the closet under the stairs held a vacuum cleaner and folded card tables. The latch was gone with 4 neat holes puttied over, and Sadie sat in the good armchair with a puzzle, scrubbed and brushed like an exhibit. My mother served coffee cake. My father quoted scripture, gently, the way he does when there's an audience. Sadie didn't speak, but then, she rarely speaks with strangers in the room, and nobody in that house had ever given her another way to answer. The preliminary finding came back in careful language, unable to substantiate. I read that phrase in my truck and sat there so long my coffee went cold. But 2 things happened underneath that finding, and I didn't learn about either one until later. First, Ms. Cho didn't close the file. Something about a 22-year-old woman with no physician of record for 4 years had snagged in her, and she flagged the case for a full guardianship review, which meant a courtroom, which meant a judge, which meant sworn answers. Second, my photograph of the latch went into that file, and files have a way of surfacing exactly when people pray they won't. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was a caseworker had stood 6 feet from my sister and the paperwork had smiled back at her. If you've ever sat across from an official, knowing the truth was in the room and watching the forms say otherwise, you know exactly what that drive back to Columbus felt like. Stay with me. Because what the court did next is the part nobody warns you about, and it is worse than anything my parents did. And if you believe people like my sister deserve to be seen, take 1 second and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the families living them right now. The guardianship review came with one order my parents couldn't charm their way around: an independent medical evaluation by a physician chosen from the court's list. and the name that came up was Dr. Naomi Bennett. I could have hugged the clerk who drew it. Dr. Bennett ran the developmental clinic 2 counties over, and she was the specialist who'd seen Sadie as a little girl, right up until my parents decided her follow-up appointments were becoming a topic at church. She was 55 now, silver-bobbed, with the bedside patience of a woman who has spent 30 years being lied to by nervous parents. Her report was 40 minutes of appointment and 4 pages of quiet devastation. No physician of record in 4 years. No dental care anyone could document. Skills regression across the board, in a woman whose childhood chart had shown her learning letters. And then, the part that put a lump in my throat in a courthouse hallway. As part of the evaluation, Dr. Bennett set a basic communication tablet on the table, the kind with picture buttons and a keyboard, the kind Sadie had never once been offered. It took my sister a while to touch it. Then she pecked out, 1 letter at a time, the first word anyone had gotten from her in years. Myra. Not mom. Not help. My name. Dr. Bennett wrote in her report that the ward demonstrated communicative capacity that had gone unsupported for years, and that this constituted neglect of care in her professional opinion. Bill Hartman called me that night, and I asked him if this meant it was over, if the judge would just hand her to me now. There was a pause I did not like. Removing a guardian, he said, is not the same thing as choosing the next one, and you need to hear that twice. My parents never got formally removed, and that detail tells you everything about how my family fights. The morning of the hearing, their lawyer stood up and announced they were voluntarily resigning as guardians, for health reasons, with their heads high and their reputations unfindable by any search of court records. No finding of neglect, no finding of anything. Just a graceful step to the side, and suddenly the courtroom's only question was who steps in, and there were 2 petitions on the desk of Judge Carol Maddox. Mine, and my Aunt Corinne's. Their lawyer, a smooth operator named Prescott, read my life out loud like a rap sheet, a misdemeanor for assaulting the ward's own father. 14 years of absence, a 1-bedroom apartment 2 hours away. A job that runs on 24-hour shifts, holidays, no set schedule. He asked the court, reasonably, gently, what happens to a vulnerable woman alone in an apartment in Columbus while her sister works a full day and night on an ambulance? I watched Judge Maddox write something down, and I knew the answer was nothing good. Then Corinne took the stand in her Sunday coat, and she was magnificent. I'll give her that. A big farmhouse 10 minutes from everything Sadie knows. A husband, Wade, retired, home all day. Letters of support from the pastor and half the congregation. Family that steps up, Prescott said, instead of family that shows up angry at funerals. The ruling took Judge Maddox 20 minutes. Guardianship of the person and temporary control of the trust to Corinne Fletcher. Scheduled visitation for the sister. Review in 1 year. On the courthouse steps, my aunt hugged me, actually hugged me, in front of everyone, and put her mouth next to my ear. We keep our own, Myra, she said. You'll see. It took me 3 weeks to understand what keeping meant to my aunt. Here's the truth I have to own. The first visit, I wanted to believe. Corinne and Wade had a farmhouse on Route 9, just past their little motel, the Hillside Motor Lodge, 12 rooms and a gravel lot they'd run for 30 years. Corinne showed me a bedroom painted yellow because somebody had told her Sadie liked yellow, and there were fresh cookies, and Wade had screwed a birdhouse to the window frame, level and solid. The work of a man who still took pride in a straight screw. Sadie sat at the kitchen table with a puzzle. Calm. Fed. I sat in my truck afterward and let myself exhale for the first time in 2 months. It felt like maybe the system had stumbled sideways into something decent, but 2 things from that kitchen followed me home, the way small wrong details follow you out of a call that's about to go bad. The first was how Corinne talked. Every sentence about Sadie went past Sadie, over her head, in the third person, while my sister sat right there. She eats good now. She doesn't need all that screen nonsense. She's better off with routine. Sadie's picture schedule, the little hand-drawn week she'd kept since Dr. Bennett's visit, was gone from the wall, and in its place hung a chore list in Corinne's handwriting. Towels. sweeping. Rooms. The second thing was on the stairway wall. A line of family photos marching up the steps, weddings and fair ribbons, and my father as a young man in front of the store, and in the middle of them, a blank rectangle of wallpaper, brighter than everything around it. The shape of a small picture frame. Something had hung there for decades, long enough to shadow the paper, and someone had taken it down. I didn't ask. I should have asked. The call came on a Thursday from a number I didn't know. Rachel Alvarez ran the Bright Path Adult Day program in Millbrook, 20 years in the field, and Dr. Bennett's report had gotten Sadie enrolled there 3 days a week as a condition everyone smiled about in court. Rachel wasn't smiling now. Corinne had pulled Sadie out, effective immediately, with a form letter citing cost. Bright Path wasn't cheap, but it was exactly what my grandmother's trust existed to pay for, and the letter to the court called it a non-essential expense, preserving the ward's assets. The same week, a change of provider form moved Sadie's medical care from Dr. Bennett's clinic to a telehealth service. More convenient, the paperwork said. For whom? It didn't say. Rachel talked to me for a long time that night, careful, professional, and absolutely clear. "I've been doing this 20 years, she said. When a new guardian's first 3 moves are cancel the program, switch the doctor to a screen, and shorten the visits. That's not budgeting, that's turning off the eyes." She couldn't report a feeling, and she knew it, and it was eating her. Mandated reporters need something to report. So I did the one thing I could do from where I stood. Through Hartman, I filed a request for the trust accounting, which any interested family member can ask the court to compel. Corinne had been trustee ever since Grandma died, first as a temporary appointment, then with the court's blessing. However she'd been spending my sister's money, she now owed a judge the receipts. The accounting came back 3 weeks later, and Hartman called me before I'd even finished my shift. My grandmother's lawyer had said the trust could fund a lifetime of care, he reminded me. Then he said, "Myra, the accounting they filed is 1 page long." While the lawyers fought about that single page, I kept my scheduled visits, and the visits kept shrinking. Third one, I noticed what was missing before I got my coat off. The communication tablet, the one Dr. Bennett had gotten issued through her clinic before the switch, was gone from Sadie's room. Corinne didn't even pretend. She was hiding behind that thing, she said, wiping the counter that didn't need wiping. "In this house, we talk like people." My sister sat at that kitchen table with her hands quiet in her lap, and the whole drive over she'd have known I was coming, because I always came the same day, and there was nothing on that table she could answer me with. When I hugged her goodbye, she grabbed my jacket sleeve in her fist and held on, and she made a sound low in her throat, one long M, pressed out like something lifted from under a door. 9 years on a truck, I have carried people out of car wrecks. That sound is the thing I still hear at night. I complained through Hartman about the tablet within the week. Corinne's answer came back through the court, and it was a masterpiece. A behavior journal in her own neat hand, documenting that after every visit from the sister, the ward was agitated, didn't sleep, refused tasks. Her recommendation, regretfully, as guardian: shorter visits, supervised, for Sadie's own stability. I sat in my truck on the shoulder of Route 9 with that letter and finally understood the game the way you understand ice under your boots. My aunt didn't need to prove she was good. She controlled every scrap of paper coming out of that farmhouse, and paper was all the court could see. Corinne didn't need to be right. She just needed me to look wrong. So we got smarter, and by we, I mean the 2 women who saved this story. Dr. Bennett was still, on paper, part of the telehealth transition file, and she read Corinne's own paperwork against her. If care was moving to a screen, then the patient needed a device with communication software as durable medical support, prescribed pursuant to the evaluation the court itself had ordered. Corinne had chosen telehealth. Telehealth needs a tablet. Refusing the tablet meant refusing the doctor she'd picked, on the record. Checkmate, politely, in triplicate. Rachel built it, a backup tablet, same communication app Sadie had learned, her old picture vocabulary restored from the program's files, everything laid out where her hands remembered it. And I got to be the delivery woman, because the handoff happened at the one place Corinne couldn't control or decline, the church picnic, in front of the pastor and the potato salad, and everybody whose good opinion my family had been buying for 50 years. I set the tablet in front of my sister at a picnic table like it was any other Tuesday. Medical equipment, I told Corinne, loud enough for the deacons. Court-ordered evaluation follow-up. Feel free to call Dr. Bennett. Sadie's hands hovered over it for a long few seconds, and then she found her rhythm like she'd never lost it. Icons, keyboard, home screen. And then, my sister did something Rachel hadn't programmed and I hadn't imagined. She opened the button editor herself, typed one letter at a time, picked the biggest button size, picked yellow, and saved her own sentence to the front page of her voice. I am not a secret. She pressed it once, and the tablet said it out loud in its flat little voice, right there over the potato salad. I looked up at my aunt expecting fury. What was on her face was worse. Corinne had gone white as paper, like a woman seeing a ghost. The one-page accounting didn't survive contact with Judge Maddox. The court ordered a full amended filing with documentation, and when it landed, Hartman spread it across his desk like a wreck he was reconstructing. Caregiver reimbursement monthly to Corinne Fletcher for services no outside agency had ever been hired to provide. Room renovation for the ward, except the invoice was from a commercial roofer, and the roof in the photos was the Hillside Motor Lodges, a used pickup titled to Wade, justified as ward transportation. Line by line, in 14 months as trustee, my aunt had moved almost $70,000 of my sister's money into the gravity of that motel. My grandmother, so it never happens again, had been buying shingles. Hartman was honest about what we had and didn't have. For criminal charges, you need a prosecutor, and prosecutors need referrals, timing, appetite. But for the probate court, an accounting like this was enough to demand a review of the guardianship itself, and he filed for one before the week was out. Corinne answered the way she answered everything, with paper and pedigree. Receipts for everything, explanations threaded through with the ward benefits from a stable family property, and another warm letter from the pastor. And then she counterpunched. A motion landed on us regarding my visitation, citing the behavior journal, citing the scene at the picnic. That word again, and pending the review, my visits were suspended entirely. I found out on a Tuesday in the station parking lot, reading Hartman's email with my thumb over the screen so it wouldn't shake. Somewhere on Route 9, my sister was waiting for the day of the week when I always came, with her tablet if they'd even left it in her room, and I was not coming, and no one was going to explain to her why. The town picked its side the way small towns do, quietly, at the register and the gas pump. I'd moved into a rented apartment in Millbrook by then to be 10 minutes away instead of 2 hours, transferring to a station that covered the county, and I felt the temperature everywhere I went. The Austin girl with the record, back and stirring up money trouble against the family that stepped up. My mother sent word through a church friend, a folded note left under my wiper like a parking ticket. Look what you're doing to this family. No signature. She knew I'd know. Then Wade called me. 40 seconds. One time. A number that never called again. My uncle, 66 years old. A man I'd watched hang a birdhouse with a level, talking fast and low like a man in a house where the floorboards report to somebody. She's moved the girl to the motel, he said. End room. 14. Says it's while the bedroom gets repainted. Myra. She keeps the key on her ring. Then he hung up, and when I called back it went nowhere, and I sat with my phone in my hand doing the math I least wanted to do. APS had a follow-up scheduled at the farmhouse. The farmhouse was the address in every file. On paper, Sadie lived in a yellow bedroom with a birdhouse at the window. In fact, my 22-year-old sister was sleeping in room 14 of a roadside motel, at the far end of the lot, past the ice machine, where no caseworker was ever going to knock, because no caseworker had a reason to. My aunt had learned the same lesson I had. The system sees paper. She was better at paper than the truth had any chance of being. Dr. Bennett caught the next thread, because pharmacists see what courtrooms don't. Sadie's refill history crossed her desk as part of the review file, and the pattern stood out like a wrong rhythm on a monitor. A sedating medication, started small right after Corinne took over, stepped up twice since, refilled like clockwork, prescribed by a telehealth doctor who had never once seen my sister in person. There are legitimate uses for that medication. There is no legitimate version of the dose climbing while the patient gets seen by nobody. Bennett did what mandated reporters do. She filed a report with APS herself, and she pushed the telehealth service hard enough that they flagged the account for an in-person visit before the next refill. Paper against paper at last, except every move still ran on the system's clock. APS went to the farmhouse, the address in the file. The house was clean, the yellow room was staged like a catalog page, and Corinne, warm as pie, explained that Sadie was spending a few days with a cousin, such a shame to miss them. Not able to see the ward. Noted. A follow-up was calendared, and the calendar said 10 days. I got that update from Ms. Cho's office on a Friday afternoon, standing in the ambulance bay, and I remember looking at the rig behind me and doing the conversion that never stops running in my head. In my job, we measure emergencies in minutes. The system measures them in appointments. 10 days was 240 hours of my sister behind a door I legally could not approach, sedated on a stranger's signature. And the forecast that weekend said the first real heat of the summer was coming in. Mid-90s by Sunday, the kind of heat that turns the last room by the ice machine into a kiln. Saturday night, my mother knocked on the door of my rented apartment. The first time in 14 years we'd been alone in a room together. She'd brought a casserole, God help me, like a woman making a house call on a sick relation, and she set it on my counter and looked around at my folding chairs and my medic bag in the corner, and I watched her file it all under evidence of a life gone wrong. Here's what my mother didn't do. She didn't deny any of it. Not the closet, not the latch, not the money. Denial was for people without options. My mother negotiated. Drop the money business, she said, smoothing a wrinkle out of my dish towel. It's ugly, and it's beneath us. And Corinne will soften once she's not being attacked. Come home. Sit with us at church. In a year, this is a story nobody tells. We can be a family again, Myra. Family means nobody has to know. The same sentence, word for word, that she'd said over a dustpan of broken glass 14 years ago, offered to me now like a gift, like a key to the good rooms of the house. And I finally heard the sentence for what it had always been. Not a rule about privacy. A price list. Everything in that house had always been for sale, and the currency was silence, and the people who paid were the ones who couldn't argue. She was at the door when she fired the last shot. You think you're the first person in this family to make noise about how we do things? She said. You have no idea what your grandmother buried to keep this family standing. Ask yourself why that trust exists at all. Then she was gone. Heels on the stairwell, casserole abandoned on my counter like a hostage. I stood at the window a long time. People ask why I didn't just take my sister and run, and I want you to hear the answer straight. A woman with a record who steals a ward hands the family the only ending they ever wanted. Myra the danger, Sadie the secret, forever. If you've ever had to fight slow while everything in you screamed to fight fast, put it in the comments, because I know you're out there. And subscribe, because at 4 the next morning, my pager went off, and the address was the Hillside Motor Lodge. The dispatch read like any other. Female, 20s, found wandering, possible altered mental status. Hillside Motor Lodge, Route 9. My partner, Dana Reyes, was driving, and I knew the address the way you know a stove is hot, and I told her before we cleared the first light. That's my sister's placement. Family. You lead, I document, and everything goes by the book twice. Dana just nodded and pushed the pedal down. First light of morning, and there was Sadie in the gravel lot, barefoot on stones already warm, in yesterday's clothes, swaying like a sapling. A trucker who'd stopped for ice had found her and had the sense to call. Her lips were cracked, her skin tinted when Dana pinched it, dehydration you could see from 6 feet out, and her eyes were swimming, pupils sluggish, a sedation fog you don't get from one bad night. She flinched from the rig's lights until I killed everything but the low beams. I announced myself the only way that has ever worked. 2 knocks, soft, on the side of the stretcher. Her head came around and her hand came out, and she knocked twice on my forearm, and then she let us work like the bravest patient I have ever had. Room 14's door stood open where the trucker had found it swinging. On the outside, screwed into the frame at adult height, a hasp and padlock, the latch's ugly cousin, and the bathroom window at the back stood open with the screen pushed out from inside. My sister, sedated and cooking in a shut room as the heat came in, had climbed out a window not much bigger than a suitcase. She hadn't wandered off. She had rescued herself. We were loading her when Corinne crossed the lot in her robe, guardianship letters literally in hand, saying there was no need for the hospital, family handles, family. Dana, lead medic, God bless her forever, didn't even look up. "Ma'am, your paperwork can meet us at County General," she said. And in the ambient light I saw what Sadie had clamped under her arm. The tablet. Screen cracked in one corner. She'd gone out the window holding her voice. A hospital is the one building in America where paper meets its match, because hospitals generate more of it than anybody. The emergency department worked Sadie up, and the chart said what charts say: no adjectives, all knives, dehydration requiring fluids, sedative level above the therapeutic range for the listed prescription, weight well below her documented weight from Dr. Bennett's evaluation the year before. Old marks at the wrists that the attending noted in language I'm not going to repeat here, except to say she photographed them for the record with the same flat care she'd give a burn. Every one of those people is a mandated reporter. By 7 that morning, the hospital had called APS. By 9, Ms. Cho was in the hallway, and this time, nothing was staged. And the finding wrote itself. Substantiated. When Corinne arrived with her letters, the hospital did the beautiful bureaucratic thing and refused discharge, unsafe environment pending investigation, and there is no charm and no pastor's letter that moves an attending physician with a chart like that in her hand. I was off shift and in the waiting room when they let me back. Sadie was rehydrated, propped up, tablet on her lap, cracked corner and all. She pressed her yellow button, and the flat little voice said, "I am not a secret." Then she typed and pressed again. "Don't go." So I didn't. That afternoon, from a chair beside her bed, I signed a sworn statement laying out everything: the funeral, the latch, the closet I grew up watching, my parents, my aunt, dates, photographs, all of it. And Hartman filed an emergency petition to suspend Corinne that same day, and the court named a guardian ad litem for Sadie before the week was out. My mother reached the ward's hallway around dinner, and a social worker met her at the line the hospital had drawn and turned her around. Mom looked at me over that woman's shoulder and she didn't raise her voice at all. "You didn't save this family," she said. "You ended it." She was half right. 2 days later, Hartman called me to his office, and there was a banker's box on his desk with a dead woman's handwriting on the lid. "When Ruth signed the trust," he said, "she also left this, sealed, with instructions to open it only if the trust ever ended up in a fight." He looked tired. "I'd say this qualifies," he said, and cut the tape. Inside was the answer to a question I hadn't known enough to ask. On top, a photograph, black and white, 2 little boys in front of Austin Hardware, the taller one unmistakably my father at about 8, grinning, his arm around a smaller boy with a crooked collar and eyes that didn't meet the camera. I turned it over. In pencil, in my grandmother's hand, 2 names, Gerald and Tommy. Under the photo, a folder, and I read it standing up because sitting felt wrong. An admission record from Ridgeway State School, hours away, for Thomas Austin, age 6. The intake form's reason for placement, typed by some clerk more than 50 years ago, said the family is unable to manage the child's condition in the community. Receipts, monthly, 3 years of them, my grandmother's checks to an institution. Then a death certificate, Thomas Austin, age 9, pneumonia. And a single line from the school's office, matter of fact as a receipt for shingles. Burial on facility grounds. Marker 114. My father had a little brother. Corinne had a little brother. He was 6, and he was different the way Sadie is different, and this family put him in a car, told the town he'd gone to live with relatives, and sanded him out of every story for half a century. The blank rectangle on Corinne's stairway wall finally had a name. So did my grandmother's sentence. So it never happens again. The trust wasn't estate planning. It was a confession, in the only currency my family ever used. I put the photograph in my jacket, and I told Hartman I needed a day before the hearing prep. There was one person left alive who had watched that car drive away, and I needed to look her in the eye. Corinne came to the hospital that week to try to see Sadie and got stopped at the desk, and instead of letting security walk her out, I asked her to sit with me in the chapel because I had a photograph in my pocket and a case to build, and I needed to know exactly what I was fighting. I set the picture of the two boys on the seat between us. My aunt looked at it the way you'd look at a wound reopening, and then, in a voice like gravel raked flat, she gave me the only unguarded minutes of her life I ever got. She was 10 when their mother dressed Tommy in his church clothes on an ordinary Tuesday. They told the school he was visiting cousins downstate. They visited twice, and the doctors said visits unsettle the residents. Better to let him adjust, and their parents obeyed, because doctors were like pastors then, and shame was like gravity. She was 13 when the box of ashes came, and there was no funeral, and her mother ironed sheets that whole afternoon like the iron was the only thing keeping the house from lifting off the earth. Then my aunt looked at me dry-eyed and doubled down, and this is the part I need you to sit with, because it is the whole creed of my family, said out loud at last. You don't hand family to the state, Myra. The state sent Tommy home in a box. Every single thing I did to keep that girl out of a place like Ridgeway. You'd have done the same if you'd carried it as long as I have. I kept my voice level, which is the one skill my job and my childhood agree on. Fear didn't sign those reimbursement checks, Aunt Corinne, I said. You rebuilt Tommy's room with the lock on the outside and told yourself it was rescue. She stood up, straightened her coat, and left me sitting under the little electric altar candles. In the parking garage, Prescott was waiting beside my truck. My clients have a proposal, he said. The deal came typed on heavy letterhead, and it was, I'll admit it, beautifully built. Corinne resigns as guardian and trustee, effective immediately. My parents support my petition, on the record. Sadie comes home with me inside a week. No contest, no trial. In exchange, the amended trust accounting gets sealed by agreement, no referral to the county prosecutor from any party, and both sides sign a statement calling the whole year a family misunderstanding, resolved privately. Hartman walked me through it twice, and then he did the thing honest lawyers do and argued against himself. Take it, he said. As your attorney, that's my advice with both hands. A contested hearing means your record read out loud again, your 14 years gone, and a guardian ad litem who might decide the whole family is radioactive and recommend a neutral professional guardian. Do you understand what that can mean? A group home with a waiting list and shift staff. You could win the war and watch her go to the exact place your aunt used to scare herself with. Then he took his glasses off. And as Ruth's lawyer for 40 years, he said, I'll tell you, she did not leave that box sealed for it to stay sealed. I didn't decide in that office. I drove to the hospital and I laid it out for the one person every deal in this family had always been made around, never with. I used plain words and the tablet between us. Go home with me now, and it stays quiet. Or we fight, and everybody will know everything, and fighting has a risk in it I can't erase. My sister listened with her whole stillness. Then she typed, and the flat little voice said, no more secrets. She looked at me and waited, because the signature still had to be mine. My family had spent 50 years buying safety with silence, and the bill always went to whoever couldn't argue. Now they were offering me the family discount. I said no on a Wednesday, and then I spent 3 weeks making the no survivable. I took the instructor job at the community college, teaching EMT students mornings, home by 3, weekends free, a schedule a judge could set a watch by, and turning in my truck keys at the station hurt in a place I don't have clean words for. 9 years, that rig. Dana hugged me in the bay and said, you're the best medic I ever ran with, and I said, I know, that's the price, and we left it there, which is how medics say everything. Sadie spent those weeks in a temporary respite placement arranged through the county board while Corinne stood suspended, a small staffed house where Rachel knew the manager, and I visited every other day and hated every mile of the drive. I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom house 4 blocks from Bright Path, and Rachel walked the rooms with me, moving a lamp Sadie would hate, flagging the strobing porch light, building a support plan page by page like a woman laying sandbags before a flood she'd seen before. Dr. Bennett wrote a capacity evaluation for the court, concluding that with her device, Sadie could express preferences reliably, and petitioned for her to be heard at the hearing through it. And Hartman, on my written instruction, delivered the complete amended accounting, the pharmacy records, and copies of everything in my grandmother's box to the county prosecutor's office, referral filed, receipt stamped, before the hearing date. Understand what that meant? The deal's whole engine was silence for safety, and we drove it off a cliff on purpose. There was no version left where anyone could offer me my sister in exchange for quiet, because quiet no longer existed to sell. The Guardian ad litem interviewed Sadie 3 times with Rachel supporting, and her report went to the judge sealed, so we walked in blind on the one voice that mattered most. The hearing fell on a Tuesday. My family arrived in church clothes. They had spent 50 years rehearsing how to look. None of them had ever rehearsed being heard. Judge Maddox's courtroom is small, oak the color of strong tea, a ceiling fan that clicks on every 4th turn. It was full. My parents sat behind Prescott's table with the pastor between them like a character witness for the whole bloodline, and half the congregation filled the benches, and I had Hartman, Rachel on the aisle, and Dr. Bennett reading her own notes like she was about to defend a dissertation. Corinne sat very straight and did not look at me once. Prescott went first, and he was worth whatever they were paying him. He didn't rant. He regretted. He regretted that a troubled young woman who once put her own father through a door now sought control of a vulnerable woman and, coincidentally, her substantial trust. He regretted 14 years of absence rewritten as heroism. He walked the judge through me quitting a 9-year career, framed as instability, a woman who changes jobs under pressure. And then he pulled the pin on the one I hadn't seen coming. "Your Honor," he said, "my clients offered this woman everything she claims to want, her sister, placed with her within days, and she refused, because the offer asked one thing of her: discretion. Ask yourself what kind of rescuer turns down the rescue unless she's allowed to burn the family down with it." It was good. It was so good I felt the benches believe it behind me, the little shift of 50 spines at once. He finished by offering the court an off-ramp painted in reasonableness, if not Corinne, then a neutral professional guardian and an appropriate residential placement, structured, staffed, safe. A group home, wearing the nicest possible words. Judge Maddox wrote for a moment, and the fan clicked, and she looked over her glasses at our table. "Ms. Austin," she said, "I'll hear from you." Hartman leaned into me on the way up, one hand on my sleeve. "Now or never," he said. "You sure?" I looked at the rail where my sister sat with Rachel, her tablet in both hands like a hymnal. I was sure. I'd learned one thing from watching my family operate for 30 years, and I used it against them now. Whoever controls the worst version of the story controls the room, so I told the worst version of mine before Prescott could. Under oath, I gave the court my record, the screen door, the plea, no varnish. I gave them the 14 years, the returned packages, the 2 trips where I sat across from the store and drove away, and I did not dress a single one of those years up as anything but failure. I failed her first, I told Judge Maddox. Everyone in this courtroom with my last name failed her. The difference is that I am done doing it quietly. Then I answered the deal, because the whole room was waiting for it. "It's true," I said. "Last week I was offered my sister back in a matter of days, and the condition was that everything stay what my family calls private. Your Honor, my family has a saying. Family means nobody has to know. I heard my mother say it over broken glass when I was 18, and I heard her say it in my kitchen a month ago, and I want the record to show what that sentence has cost. It cost my sister 4 years behind a signature, sedated for convenience, sleeping in a motel room with a lock on the wrong side of the door. And more than 50 years ago, it cost a 6-year-old boy named Thomas Austin his whole life. He was my father's brother. This family told the town he went to live with cousins, and he died at 9 in a state institution. And he has been lying under a stone that says 114 ever since, because a number can't embarrass anybody. The benches behind me had gone so quiet I could hear the fan click. My father was staring at his hands. I looked at the judge and put down the last of it. My parents will tell you Sadie was calm in that closet, I said. Calm was the whole problem. Quiet is not the same as peace. And then I asked for the thing nobody in that courtroom expected, least of all the woman asking. Not full guardianship. Limited guardianship, health and safety only, with a supported decision-making plan, her day program, her own doctor, and a standing yearly review. I'm not asking to own my sister's life, I said. I'm asking to stand next to it. She's had enough owners. Judge Maddox let the room settle, and then she said the sentence I will be grateful for until I die. There is one person this court has not heard from, she said. Sadie, would you like to answer? Prescott objected before Rachel was even out of her seat. Coached testimony, unreliable modality, the ward's documented suggestibility, and Maddox heard him out, and then noted that the court had ordered Dr. Bennett's capacity evaluation precisely for this question and had read it, overruled. And the clerk patched the tablet's little speaker through the courtroom sound, and my sister came forward with Rachel beside her, cracked screen and all. It is a particular kind of silence, 50 people listening to someone type. Each letter was a soft tap, and the fan clicked, and nobody breathed. She pressed her yellow button first, the one she built herself at a church picnic, and the flat voice set it to the rafters. I am not a secret. Then, tap by tap, her own words, no prompt, no menu, while the county watched her do the thing her family had spent 22 years saying she couldn't. I want to live with my sister. She knocks before she opens the door. I watched a bailiff, a big man with a face like a cinder block, blink hard and study the ceiling. Prescott rose again, gamely, asked whether anyone could verify these were her words. And that's when Maddox opened the sealed report from the Guardian ad litem and read the summary aloud. 3 independent interviews. Consistent expressed preference. The ward asks for her sister by name in every session. Recommendation. Placement with the sister under limited guardianship. Same answer. 3 times, to a stranger, with nobody from either family in the room. Somewhere behind me I heard my mother make a small sound and go still. And Corinne, my aunt, the keeper of every gate, stood up in the middle of the benches, gripped the rail in front of her, looked at the yellow button glowing on that cracked screen for one long second, and walked out of the courtroom before the ruling, her heels very loud and her back very straight. She never said a word. Some people can only survive the truth at a dosage they can leave the room from. Judge Maddox squared the papers on her bench. I'm prepared to rule, she said. The ruling came in the dry, level voice judges save for the things that change everything. Corinne Fletcher, removed as guardian and trustee, effective immediately. The trust, transferred to a corporate trustee at a bank in Columbus, with instructions to review every disbursement my aunt had made as trustee. Limited guardianship of the person of Sadie Ruth Austin, granted to Myra Austin, with a supported decision-making plan to be filed within 60 days. Bright Path enrollment restored. Dr. Naomi Bennett confirmed as physician of record. Annual review calendared. And then Judge Maddox looked at Prescott over her glasses with something almost like dry humor. As to the financial matters, she said, I'm informed a referral is already with the county prosecutor, so that is out of this court's hands, and I suspect that is exactly where the petitioner intended it to be. Court adjourned, and the gavel came down. One